Why does putting yourself out there after 60 feel so vulnerable? Even when you know you're ready, you've done the work, you've grown, you have big goals you're finally ready to go after, and yet that old fear of being seen still lingers, the kind that keeps you from stepping fully into the spotlight, even when you want to. I'm Mary, and I know exactly where that fear of being seen took root. It started in sixth grade and it shattered my sense of safety in a way I wouldn't fully understand for decades. I grew up in a home that was warm, affectionate, and deeply loving. My parents told us they loved us all the time. There were hugs, support, encouragement. I had a strong emotional foundation and a quiet trust in the world. So when I stepped out into it, I was shy, sure, but I wasn't afraid. I liked being in the background, but I didn't yet feel like I had to hide there. And that all changed in one school year. Sixth grade introduced me to something I hadn't known before: cruelty. And it was not the quiet, confusing kind, but it was loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. I was bullied publicly and regularly. A group of kids in my class decided I was one of their targets that year. And because I was shy and not the kind of kid who fought back, I became easy prey. What made it worse? The rest of the class joined in. And it wasn't because they were all cruel, but because fear is contagious. No one wanted to stand out. Even the teacher, who should have been the safe adult in the room, sometimes laughed along. That moment shattered any sense of emotional safety I had left. It was brutal, and I never told my parents. Even now, I kind of wonder why. I think I was ashamed. Ashamed that if everyone in my class seemed to agree that something was wrong with me, maybe they were right. Maybe my parents were wrong for loving me so unconditionally. Maybe they didn't see something the rest of the world clearly did. And back then, parents didn't really step in. There wasn't a language for bullying. There were no zero tolerance policies, no trusted adult to run to, just silence and survival. That year rewired something in me. I went from being a shy but open kid to someone who learned to disappear on purpose. And that belief that being seen was dangerous didn't fade with time. It followed me into adulthood. Quietly, but it still shaped so many of my choices. I showed up, I worked hard, I was the ultimate team player, but I kept waiting for someone to notice, to offer, to reward my effort without me having to ask. Meanwhile, the people who spoke up, who asked boldly and expected a yes, were the ones stepping into roles that I secretly hoped would come my way. And at one job, I was quietly told that a managerial role was mine, but then it went to someone else, a guy I worked closely with and genuinely liked. He was confident, charming, and the kind of person who made asking look really easy and often got what he asked for. And a little bit later, a few of us went out for drinks, and he and I ended up talking, and he admitted that he knew it had originally been offered to me. He also knew it wasn't the perfect fit for him, but he wanted it. So he went for it and he got it. I didn't show it, but I was stunned. I was hurt and so angry. My work had been seen, yay. My effort had been recognized, but in the end, that wasn't what tipped the scale. It was the fact that he asked without hesitation. Looking back, I finally understand that it's not enough to want something. You have to be willing to claim it, to step outside your comfort zone and say, "This is mine." And that same pattern kept showing up for me. When I started my first business, I joined a lot of networking groups to get the word out because, of course, there weren't all the internet, go on the web and find networking opportunities. It was all in person networking. So at these networking groups, we had regular chances to speak, to present your business. And sometimes it would be to a group of maybe 20 and sometimes 200. And I always said yes, and I always showed up. But every single time it felt so uncomfortably personal. Like the only way to grow my business was to put me on display. And no matter how often I did it, I never really got used to it. And then there were moments I didn't step forward at all. Like when a new friend who worked in broadcasting casually suggested I produce his show. We'd only just recently met, but he already seemed confident I could handle something that big. He knew I'd recently finished a master's degree in arts administration, and that's the same thing as like a communication arts master's now. So on paper, it made sense. But it wasn't just my background. He had great instincts, but I didn't know it at the time. He sensed something in me that I hadn't even begun to see in myself. At the time, I didn't know much about intuition, his or mine. So when he made the offer, I smiled and just changed the subject. And I totally brushed it off. I didn't even consider that he might be serious. So that pattern might have gone unchecked for years, except someone finally named it for me. I had started managing a successful singer-songwriter, and one of the first things he said to me was, "You're going to have to get over your desire to stay in the background." Now, I hadn't even stated that was my desire. That was something he picked up on. I already knew visibility came with the job. I'd managed other performers before, but this was different. His career was bigger, there were higher stakes, and it was more public. And he knew it would require me to be vocal, present, and confident in ways I had never been pushed to before. He wasn't being pushy, he was just being honest. And he wasn't asking me to become someone else. He was inviting me to step into the version of myself I hadn't fully claimed yet. So, at his suggestion, I signed up for an acting class. And I'm going to be honest, it was brutal. It was so vulnerable and exposing. And I hated how bad I was at it. But I honestly didn't hate the experience itself. In fact, it stretched me in ways I didn't expect. I was uncomfortable the entire time, but I kept going. That moment didn't erase all my fear, but it proved something. It proved that I could feel exposed and still move forward. Eventually, I realized something big. It wasn't my conscious mind that was running the show. It was the part of me that had learned long ago that being seen equals pain. Once I saw that, I started learning how to rewire it. And the first real tool that made a big difference for me was hypnosis. Now, it wasn't the stage kind you might have seen, with the swinging stopwatch on a chain that puts you in a daze or makes you fall asleep. This was real hypnosis. It was grounded and it was science backed. And that, from my mind, my logical brain, that worked beautifully. This kind of hypnosis is designed to work with the subconscious mind and create actual change. So, this is when things started to shift for me. And of course, it didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. Have you ever felt like your best years were still ahead, but something old kept holding you back? That's exactly where I found myself until I finally learned how to move forward. Over time, I layered in other tools like mindset work, neuroscience, understanding how emotions shape identity and behavior. And I stopped seeing fear as a flaw and started seeing it as protection. It wasn't something to eliminate, but it was actually something I could learn to work with. The need for fear, just so you know, it does not ever disappear. And honestly, that's a really good thing. But once I understood how it operated, I could start overriding it when it was reacting to outdated fears instead of my current reality. If you still find yourself pulling back and you're not sure why, you're not alone. I didn't think I was hiding. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was staying grounded and I thought I was being humble and safe. But that old fear, it had become a habit, a way of navigating the world without drawing too much attention. And it worked, of course, until it didn't work. What's wild is that the version of life I used to dream about, the kind of work I wanted to do, was always going to require me to be seen fully, not just for what I could do quietly behind the scenes, but for who I really was. And for a long time, that felt like too much to ask of myself. The truth is, a lot of us are still carrying echoes from way back, moments we didn't know were shaping us. They didn't feel like turning points at the time, just normal, just life, but they stuck. And even if it's been decades, your nervous system doesn't know that. It's not tracking the calendar, it's just asking, are we safe? Over and over and over again. So, yeah, something as simple as putting yourself out there can still feel like too much. And that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means something old is still running the show. Unraveling what happened that sixth grade year didn't happen overnight. At first, it was just a sense. Something didn't feel right. Then I started to see the pattern, how often I held back, how long I'd been doing it, and why it always felt safer to stay in the background. That unraveling, just seeing it clearly, was its own kind of relief. It gave me language for something that had felt invisible for years. But awareness alone wasn't enough to change it. That's where the rewiring came in. Mindset work, identity work, learning how the brain actually functions, and how fear can make old experiences feel like your present day truth. It took time, it took a lot of practice, it took self trust, and it took a choice to believe the version of me that my parents saw all along instead of the one my classmates tried to invent. And that choice, it changed my life again, this time in the best way. Not instantly and not without bumps and bruises along the way, but fully and for real. Thanks for hanging out. Next chapter is coming soon.